Beneath the forgotten ridges of Appalachia, there lies a family whose story is spoken only in whispers. Their bloodline twists like a river with no end, looping back upon itself until brother became father and son became husband. It is a family so entangled that even the children, when asked, could not name their fathers with certainty. In one cabin, at the edge of a hollow, lived a mother who bore children not from strangers, not from neighbors, but from the very sons she had raised. 2 sons, 1 mother, and the line that followed was unlike anything the outside world could comprehend. To stumble upon their history is to feel the weight of something unnatural, as if the earth itself rejects the story. Those who lived nearby didn't speak of it openly. They saw the faces, they heard the laughter that didn't sound quite right, and they avoided the old path that led to the cabin where this clan carried on. Behind the wooden boards of that home, blood was shared in ways forbidden, creating generations marked not only by deformity and hardship, but by an eerie sameness, voices echoing too close, eyes that mirrored each other almost perfectly, and a silence about the past that hung over them like a curse. The horror of this family does not rest in a single act. It is in the pattern, the repeated merging of mother and son, of siblings who were also cousins, of fathers whose names blurred until they disappeared. When outsiders pieced together the fragments, they uncovered something both simple and terrifying, a family tree that was not a tree at all, but a closed circle. The mother who bore sons also bore grandchildren by them, and as the decades passed, the circle only tightened until every child born carried within them the shadow of the same name, the same blood, the same secret. This is not the story of one mistake, nor of desperation born from isolation alone. This is the story of how tradition, silence, and secrecy can birth a nightmare, a clan so bound by its own blood that it became both womb and tomb for its descendants. And as we peel back the silence surrounding them, you will begin to understand why some histories were never meant to be told. The family began in obscurity, like so many others who settled in the mountains. Poverty bound them tightly, cut off from roads, schools, and churches. In that loneliness, the ordinary laws of kinship began to bend. At first, it may have been whispers of a father too close to his daughter, or a brother who crossed a line that should never be crossed, but the silence of the hills swallowed it whole, and no one came to intervene. One sin became two became a pattern, and soon there was no dividing line between where family ended and forbidden blood began. The mother at the heart of this story was remembered by those nearby as both stern and secretive. Her cabin stood like a fortress, weathered and dark, with its door closed to strangers. Yet inside, her 2 sons grew not just as children, but as men who would come to fulfill a role most sons never would. In time, the mother bore children by them, her sons by birth, and her husbands by blood. Neighbors suspected but dared not speak. When a woman birthed children with no man to claim them, the community looked away, preferring rumor to confrontation, and in that silence her household continued as if the outside world did not exist. Children born of this bond carried a heaviness in their bodies and their faces. Some bore the signs of what repeated unions of close kin can bring: eyes too close together, jaws that didn't quite align, minds that developed differently. Others appeared almost normal, though their voices sometimes carried a flatness, their expressions a strangeness that unsettled even the kindest visitor. The truth was written not just in their features, but in their family tree, which forked and circled until it collapsed in on itself. This was no accident, no single dark chapter. It became their way of life. The sons were not only brothers, they were fathers to the same children and husbands to the same woman. Their offspring grew up with no clear answer when asked who begot them, because the truth was both son and brother, both father and uncle. To call it confusion is too simple. It was a maze of bloodlines, designed not by choice, but by the suffocating isolation of a family that locked itself away from the wider world. And yet, as haunting as this was, it continued, year after year, child after child, until the outside world could no longer pretend it didn't exist. When the outside world finally began to take notice, it wasn't through the pages of official records or the words of preachers. It was through sightings, brief and unsettling, of children who did not seem like others. A passerby would recall a boy who spoke with an unusual slur, a girl who laughed without reason, or a cluster of siblings whose faces looked so strikingly alike they might have been the same child copied again and again. Rumors spread like smoke in the wind. Talk of deformity, of madness, of bloodlines that ran in a circle with no end. The cabin where the family lived became a place locals avoided. Hunters passing through the woods would tell of hearing voices chanting in monotone, as if the children all spoke at once. Others swore they had seen figures watching from the windows, pale faces pressed against the glass, their expressions blank, unblinking. In truth, these children were not monsters, but they were the product of a lineage that carried within it the weight of too much sameness. The genetic toll of brothers fathering their mothers' children revealed itself in ways both subtle and grotesque. For the children, their world was painfully small. They were taught to fear outsiders, to stay near the home, and to rely only on family. But family was the very source of their suffering. A girl might discover that the boy she called her brother was also her half-nephew. A boy might realize that his mother was also his grandmother. These were not secrets, whispered in shame. They were facts of life, accepted in the same way that the sun rose over the ridge each morning. But acceptance did not erase the strangeness that clung to them like a shadow. Over time, this family became both feared and pitied. Feared because the sight of them unsettled even the hardest men in town. Pitied because their lives seemed trapped in a cycle they could not break. The sins of their parents had already written their futures, etched into their bodies and their minds, yet still the family did not stop. Each new birth seemed less like the joy of life and more like a continuation of a curse. And with every generation the question grew louder, whispered among neighbors who did not dare speak openly. How much longer could this family survive before collapsing entirely under the weight of its own blood? The deeper one studies this family, the more disturbing the truth becomes. Their bloodline did not merely repeat, it folded in on itself, crushing all sense of ancestry. Imagine a family tree with branches hacked away, leaving only a circle, looping endlessly. A child might carry more of their grandmother than their father, yet both identities pointed to the same woman. A mother gave birth to her sons, and those sons gave her more children, who were their siblings and their offspring simultaneously. In this home, the titles of mother, son, brother, father, each dissolved into one indistinguishable role. The psychological weight of such a life cannot be overstated. Children grew up without clear boundaries, without the structure of kinship that defines the rest of humanity. When a girl cannot name who her father is because her father and her brother are one and the same, the very meaning of identity begins to unravel. Stories tell of children sitting in silence for hours, their eyes vacant, as if they had retreated into themselves. Others displayed sudden bursts of violence or strange mannerisms, their emotions swinging like a pendulum between laughter and rage. For the mother at the center of this story, her role was both creator and destroyer. To outsiders, she appeared weary, aged far beyond her years, but she carried herself with an authority no one in her household dared question. She ruled with silence. She knew what she had done, what her sons had done, yet she did not speak of it, and so it became normal by force. Silence became law. The genetic cost grew heavier with each birth. Some children were born frail, their bodies unable to survive past infancy. Others lived, but carried the signs of their ancestry in their faces, their posture, their minds. Locals whispered of the family up the hollow, a phrase heavy with meaning, though few dared say more. In truth, it was less a family than an experiment in isolation, one not chosen but perpetuated, perhaps even defended by the very people it harmed. And so the horror was not only in what they had become, but in the inevitability of it all. With no new blood to enter, no way to escape the circle, their fate was sealed long before the world ever learned their name. By the time word of this family reached beyond the hollow, the story had already grown into legend. Journalists, photographers, and researchers who stumbled upon them described an atmosphere that was almost unbearable. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, suffocating, as though decades of unspoken truths pressed down on anyone who dared enter. The family greeted outsiders with suspicion, their eyes darting, their words slow and guarded. But it was not hostility. It was something stranger, as if they lived in a rhythm apart from the rest of the world. Children stood clustered together, their faces bearing the unmistakable signs of their heritage. Some had jaws that never quite set right, eyes misaligned, or voices caught in a strange monotone. Others appeared almost normal, though their behavior betrayed them. Sudden laughter, words repeated like echoes, or a silence that stretched too long. To look at them was to see generations of decisions etched into flesh, carved into bone. Those who documented the family did so with a mixture of fascination and dread. One investigator noted that when asked simple questions, the children struggled to answer, as if the concepts of father, mother, and brother were jumbled in their minds. How could they not be? To call your brother father, to know your grandmother as mother, to see your uncle as your sibling, identity itself became a puzzle with no solution. And yet, amidst the strangeness, there was an undeniable humanity. The children laughed, they played, they clung to one another with a desperate loyalty. They had been born into a labyrinth not of their making, yet they carried its burden all the same. This is where the horror deepens, not in monstrosity, but in the recognition that these were human lives twisted by circumstance and silence. The outside world, of course, recoiled. Whispers of the most inbred family alive spread across small towns and eventually into newspapers, each retelling shaping the family into a grotesque myth. But behind those cruel words was a truth more haunting, that the family's story was not one of spectacle, but of generational tragedy. A curse passed down not by the supernatural, but by blood and isolation. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you walk away, or would you bear the silence like they did? In the years that followed, the family's reputation became a mirror for society's darkest fascinations. People traveled from towns over just to catch a glimpse of them, to see with their own eyes the faces that bore the weight of too much kinship. Some came with pity, others with cruelty, but all left with the same uneasy feeling, that they had witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. The family themselves rarely ventured far from their hollow. When they did, the reaction was instant. Whispers followed them in stores, stares burned into their backs, and children pointed with wide eyes. They had become living symbols of their own isolation. The mother at the heart of it all grew older, her presence still commanding, though frailer with each year. The sons, once young men bound to her, became shadows of themselves, trapped in roles that blurred across generations. Their children too reached adulthood carrying the same confusion, the same burden. For them, escape was nearly impossible. Poverty chained them as tightly as blood. With no money, no education, and no trust in outsiders, the cycle ground on. Historians and geneticists who studied families like this one described the outcome as inevitable. Without new blood, each generation carries the flaws of the last, amplified, magnified, until survival itself becomes uncertain. In this way, the family's very existence was a slow form of erasure, their bodies, their minds, their future, all dissolving in the silence of the hills. And yet, one cannot help but wonder, was it truly choice, or was it desperation disguised as tradition? Did the mother believe she was preserving something by keeping her sons close? Or had she resigned herself to a world where no man came for her, and so she turned inward toward her own blood? These are questions no one living can answer. The cabin has long since fallen quiet, its wood rotting into the earth, its roof caved under time, but the echoes remain. Even now, descendants still live, scattered, some carrying whispers of the old ways in their blood. Their story is not spoken openly, but in hushed tones, as if saying it aloud might awaken something best left buried. For them, the past is not gone. It lingers in their faces, in their names, in the strange silence that clings to their family. To speak of this family is to confront the part of human history that we are taught to look away from. We are raised to believe that family is a place of safety, of comfort, of blood that protects. But here blood was not a shield, it was a chain. The mother, who should have been a guardian, became the axis of a cycle that bound her sons to her and their children to one another in ways that defied every boundary of kinship. In the broader story of America, theirs is not an isolated tale. Across forgotten valleys and hollowed-out towns, there are families whose trees grow inward instead of outward, their branches curling back upon themselves. Isolation does not just starve the body, it starves the bloodline too. And when silence falls heavy over a home, secrets grow unchecked, turning into legacies that cannot be undone. This family was not cursed by myth or haunted by ghosts. They were undone by something far simpler and far more terrible, the refusal or inability to step outside the circle. The true horror lies not in their deformities, nor in the cruel headlines that labeled them. It lies in the recognition that what happened to them could happen anywhere. Isolation festers long enough. Strip away community, strip away law, strip away the watchful eyes of a world beyond, and the lines that separate kinship from transgression blur until they vanish. That is why their story lingers. It is not just about them, but about what humanity is capable of when left in the dark too long. As their tale comes to a close, the silence they lived in still clings to the memory of their hollow. The cabin may be gone, its boards reclaimed by moss and time, but the land remembers. And for those who stumble upon its story, there is a weight, a sense of having opened a door that should have stayed shut. 2 sons, 1 mother, a bloodline wound so tightly it strangled itself. This is the legacy they left behind. A warning, written not in words but in flesh and bone. Some histories were never meant to be unearthed, and yet, once seen, they cannot be forgotten.